Hi, everyone. Just before we get this next history hack outing going, we would just like to extend the most incredible thanks to everybody for the support you've given us so far. The podcast has just passed 1 million downloads, which has completely blown our minds. So, from Alex, Zach, myself, all the guys down the pub, we just want to say thank you so much. And to keep doing what you're doing, spread the word, tell your friends, like, subscribe, review. Remember, there's a Patreon, it's got its own Discord channel now where there's chat and things on it. There's Ko-Fi for dropping us a tip for an episode you'd like. There's the bookshop where all the latest books from our great guests are. And of course, just tell everybody about us because the next million downloads we hope will come a lot quicker. And who knows what is going to come up in the next year. So thank you once again. I'm going to stop waffling. Here's the show. Hello and welcome to History Hack. We have got a really exciting episode. So I'm joined by the always delectable Charlotte White, and we kind of fought over this one. So the coin was tossed in the air as to who was going to get this book, and Charlie snatched it out of the air and just said, mine. So I'm just going to throw this one over to you, Charlie. Who have we got with us today, and what or whom shall we be talking about?
We've got Michelle Morgan with us. She's written extensively on Marilyn Monroe. Yes, that's why I fought you for the book, Matt. She's explored every aspect of her career, from her early modeling assignments as Norma Jean Baker to her lasting legacy as an unlikely feminist icon. As if this was not enough to make me love her completely in an instant, Michelle has also written books about Carole Lombard and Thelma Todd, so she clearly shares my love of tragic blondes and classic Hollywood. This episode could easily last several hours, but we're here today to discuss her latest offering and the book that I fought Matt so strongly for. It's called When Marilyn Met the Queen, Marilyn Monroe's Life in England, and it's wonderful. Hello, Michelle.
Hello, that was quite an introduction. Thank you.
Well, you've had quite a fabulous career, I think.
Well, that's very kind of you to say.
Oh, it's the dream to watch Marilyn Monroe films, write about Marilyn, talk about Marilyn.
Yeah, it is. It really is a dream come true. I mean, I've been a fan since I was 15. So now to have written all these books about Marilyn and other people in Hollywood and all that, yeah, it's definitely a dream come true for me. And so, some of them are even like I think back and I go, how is this even a job? Like a few years ago I was asked to create like a Marilyn diary, and it had all these different pictures in by people like Milton Green and Sam Shaw, and my job was to go through all these pictures and choose which ones to go in the diary. And I'm like, how is this a job? It was just amazing. It's like the sort of thing I would do on a normal everyday basis anyway.
I would have done it for free.
Exactly.
How is this my job? It's fantastic.
Yeah.
Oh my goodness. So I am aware that we're going to have to get started and talk about this book because, again, I think the three of us could sit and just chat about Marilyn for many hours. She packed a lot of life and a lot of career into a very short amount of time, really. Where is she at the beginning of this book?
Well, at the beginning of this book, it's 1956, and Marilyn has left 20th Century Fox at the end of 1954. She set up her own production company. She's gone to the Actors Studio. She's been studying with Lee Strasberg, working with business manager Milton Green. And the main bulk of the book is from July to November 1956, but there's a little bit at the beginning about what she was doing in the early stages of 1956. So she was getting ready to do The Prince and the Showgirl, and she was, wondering about co-stars and directors and all that kind of thing. And then we get into the full story.
So we generally think, the stories we've heard since that dear old Sir Laurence Olivier hunted Marilyn down for this role in his film, but that's not quite true, really. So how did Marilyn sort of get the role and get her movie made?
Well, her business manager, Milton Green, and Marilyn had both been looking for suitable vehicles for their production company, Marilyn Monroe Productions. And this film came to light, and it was called The Sleeping Prince. It's now The Prince and the Showgirl. But when The Sleeping Prince came, Milton read it, Marilyn read it, they both enjoyed it. And so they decided to try and get the rights from Terence Rattigan, which they did. And then they started talking about who should co-star, who should direct, and all that kind of thing. And they actually brought Laurence Olivier into the production. It wasn't the other way around. But his production company was involved with it, as well as Marilyn Monroe Productions, but they came to him. He didn't hire her. I mean, I had this discussion with someone a couple of years ago who was saying, oh, Laurence Olivier only came onto the production because the existing director was walked out because Marilyn was temperamental. And I'm like, that is just not true. That's absolute nonsense. So yeah, what happened was she hired him basically, or she negotiated with him to be her co-star, and then he came on as director as well.
Gosh, she really looked up to him, didn't she, as an actor?
She did. She thought that if she worked with him, it would be really good for her serious film career. You know, he was classed as the world's greatest actor, although some people may argue about that. So she thought that it was a great honor to work with him, and that it would really do a lot of good for her career. And then at the same time, he thought, because he was having trouble getting the film version of Macbeth off the ground, so he thought this would just be a little, frothy romp that he could just do while he was setting up Macbeth. And he even wondered if he would end up falling in love with his co-star and all this kind of thing. They both had different notions in their head as to what would happen, and unfortunately for them, none of that happened at all.
Oh my goodness. Well, yeah, we're going to talk a lot about the relationship between Olivier and Marilyn later in our chat. But your book really draws on so many people's experiences of Marilyn at this time. This is one of the things I really enjoyed about the book, is it's not just the story of what was happening between those two very famous actors. It was the story of ordinary people and how they experienced this icon suddenly arriving in England. What happened when the peroxide hydrogen bomb landed?
Well, basically the whole entire country seemed to go completely bonkers. I mean, when they found out that she was coming over here, there was all sorts of different things. There was things like Marilyn competitions and wiggle competitions and all these sorts of things. Everybody seemed to want her to come to their nightclubs, or come to their fetes, or come to their different whatever, opening a supermarket, all of these things. Everyone just went crazy for Marilyn. And when she arrived, I mean, if you've seen the pictures of when she actually arrived in London airport, all of the staff were out. There was people on the wings of planes trying to get to see her. There was all the journalists, the photographers, everybody. And the funny thing about it was that a couple of days before, Marilyn's representatives had gone to London airport to meet with officials there, and they wanted to know about what was going to happen with security. And they basically said, we don't go in for this kind of ballyhoo. They just sort of just made them go away. But then when she arrived, they realized, oh my goodness, this is actually going to go quite serious if we don't do something about it. So all of the press were put behind barriers. But of course they came out, and it was bedlam basically. It just went absolutely crazy.
Oh my goodness. There's a wonderful story about her going to a press conference, and she's said that one of the things she's really looking forward to in England is being able to ride a bicycle in country lanes.
Yeah.
How does that work out for her?
This was one of the funniest stories that I discovered, because I've always loved the pictures. There's some famous pictures of her cycling down the lanes with her and Arthur Miller on this bike. And there's also photographs of her being presented with a bike at the Savoy press conference. And she was presented by the Daily Sketch with this particular bicycle. And then what happened after that was, because she had said that she wanted to cycle, every manufacturer, or it seemed to be every manufacturer in the UK, just had this lightning bolt moment where they thought, oh my goodness, we need to send Marilyn a bike. So for weeks afterwards, almost every day, a bike was appearing at Parkside House where she was staying, and they were all being put in the hall. And she even complained that she was frightened she was going to trip over them all because there were so many arriving every day. And the funny thing about it was the Daily Sketch started to complain that they hadn't seen Marilyn out on their bike. Then when she was seen out on a bike, everyone was like, oh, here she is, she's out on the Daily Sketch bike. But it wasn't actually that bike, it was a totally different bike that somebody else had sent to her. So that was really funny to find out that story, because I've always been intrigued by the whole cycling down the lanes thing. And I actually spoke to quite a lot of people who remember her cycling past their house, which is I can't even imagine what that must have been like, you know, just to look out of your house and then there's Marilyn Monroe cycling past. It just doesn't compute in my brain of how exciting that must have been for especially for the young teenagers who desperately wanted to see her.
I guess for many people, what we're going to be talking about in the sort of basis of your book was sort of covered in the My Week with Marilyn movie that came out a few years ago. Eddie Redmayne, Michelle Williams, Ken Branagh both got Oscar nominated for it, based on Colin Clark's books, wasn't it? So is that a fair depiction of Marilyn's experience at Parkside House, or did you find other things?
I think that the costumes were really lovely in that movie, and the sets were really lovely in that movie.
Here comes the shade.
But
it's hard to say without seeming cruel. However, I do appreciate the movie as a work of fiction. And as I say, I love the costumes and everything. The things that happened on the set in that movie were very true to what happened. You know, there was a lot of tension, there was a lot of arguments, people storming off, you know, all that kind of thing. That sort of thing did happen on the set. The sort of things that it depicted away from the set were, you know, a little bit questionable. They certainly don't match up with my own findings, and I don't want to put anyone down. But I just found different things that had happened during that time, and but I still appreciate the movie as a lovely little fairy tale.
You can say it. A lot of people have said that Colin Clark's memoirs are a little bit perhaps embellished,
fanciful.
Yeah, do you know what it reminds me? This is what it reminds me of, right? When I was a teenager, I was madly in love with George Michael. And I used to write all of these imaginary newspaper articles about, you know, George finds love with Michelle, you know, all this kind of thing. And to me, I have in my head, I have got a complete story of my imaginary relationship with George Michael. And it kind of seems a little bit like that. In my view, it just seems like it may have been a young man's dream of what could have happened, but in real life, I never went out with George Michael, and you know, that's about it. That's all about I've got to say.
I love that. I think that's gorgeous. Another one of my favorite stories in the book is when the schoolboys hatch a plan to go and meet Marilyn.
That was lovely. That was lovely to write about that story. Yes, basically they were at a college nearby on the other side of Inglefield Green, and they were coming to the end of the school year. They were coming to the end of their exams. They had nothing to lose, and somebody had said, what should we do? You know, we want to go and see Marilyn. We need to do something that's going to catch her eye, because they were aware of all the school kids that used to hang around the gates, and they wanted to do something better than that. So a huge group of young men, they met outside their college, and they had instruments and all sorts of different things. And they basically walked all the way to Parkside late at night. They went over the gate, marched up the driveway, and they sang hymns and other songs to Marilyn underneath her bedroom window. And I was very lucky when because I've been researching this book on and off for 30 years. So during that time, I was able to speak to several the young lads who aren't young lads anymore, but that's how I see them in my head. And yeah, they told me all sorts of stories about singing these songs and not knowing whether Marilyn had heard them, because she never came out, and then, you know, maybe somebody losing their temper a little bit and saying, we want Marilyn or we're coming in, and you know, and the rest of them go, oh well, you know, but maybe now we need to back off a bit. And then hearing sirens in the distance, because obviously the police had been called. And one told me that he remembers running from the police and there was some long grass and he was hiding in the grass and it had been raining, so it was wet. And he was just thinking, oh my God, what's going to happen when we get back to college, that, you know, later on. And it was just, you know, it was just such an amazing story. And the funny thing about it was that while all of these people that I spoke to, they had no idea if Marilyn had even knew they existed. But Arthur Miller, when he wrote his autobiography, he actually wrote about it in his book. So then I was able to tell these young lads that that Marilyn had actually heard them. So that was fun. That was really good. But I love that story, and I was able to write it so that I sort of brought it alive a little bit. You know, I didn't just want to say these students came and serenaded Marilyn. I wanted the reader to feel as though they were with them. So, you know, I have them coming up the drive and singing the song and rattling their horns or whatever they were doing, and then running from the police. That was a great scene to write. I love doing that.
It really is. It's so much fun, and that's just one of the many stories that you bring to life in the book. I think they liberated a teacher's car to help with the
headmaster.
attempt.
Yeah, the headmaster. Because one of the students was running late, and the headmaster had turned up at the school and said, because he'd obviously heard the rumor that they were going to go, and he said, you know, everyone needs to go back inside, do not do anything. And they're like, yeah, whatever. And some of them left, and one of the students came running out and everyone else had gone. So he just jumped into the car and drove after them. And when he was actually stopped by police, and he gave his name as the headmaster, and then he basically dumped the car and just, you know, ran to catch his friends. So it was, you know, it was a really eventful night for everybody concerned. But one of the people that I spoke to said that nobody cared the next day. You know, the headmaster was just going off at them in assembly, but nobody cared because they were coming to the end of their exams, and they were like, well, what are you going to do about it? You know, they just had the best night of their life at Marilyn's garden, and they couldn't have cared less what the headmaster thought. But he wasn't very happy by all accounts.
Oh my God. I mean, that's a leavers week to remember.
It is.
So let's get back to the Sleeping Prince as it was at the time. Marilyn goes into rehearsals at Pinewood. How does that go for her?
Not very well. The thing is, she didn't like rehearsals anyway, and I don't think that she actually wanted to do much in the way of rehearsals when she did the Sleeping Prince. But Laurence Olivier had scheduled quite a long rehearsal period, and when they were all introduced to each other, he introduced her in a way that she thought was patronizing, because he spoke about their techniques being different to her techniques. And a lot of the people on that set had worked together on the play, or they'd worked together in different films, or they knew each other, you know, around the set, around Pinewood. You know, they were all kind of linked with each other. So Marilyn was the outsider, and it seemed to her as though he was being patronizing about the method, which was, you know, the technique that she was studying, because he didn't like the method, and he was quite outspoken about that. So from the very start, that irritated her, and I think that really sort of set the stage for what was going to happen for the rest of the trip, because from then on, I think her guard was up, and she was very suspicious from then on, because she just didn't like the way that he was speaking to her in the rehearsals, or the way he was introducing her to other people.
It wasn't a way to deal with someone who had really chronic imposter syndrome.
Exactly. And the thing was as well that her last director, Joshua Logan, he had written to Laurence Olivier, and I've actually got copies of these letters, and he gave him lots of advice on how to help Marilyn, how to react to anything that she brought with her onto the set, how to deal with her drama coach, who was always on set with her. And Laurence Olivier told him, yes, that's fine. I'll take it all on board. Oh, it's great. And Joshua Logan had said to him, oh, whatever you do, don't shout at Marilyn, don't raise your voice. And he was like, oh, I can't believe anyone would raise their voice to Marilyn, which I think is hilarious now, knowing the kind of arguments they had. But he said that he was going to take all these things on board. But then when they got into the rehearsal room, he just seemed to either forget it or dismiss it and just went about his own different way of directing. And possibly after that, he learned his lesson and wished that he could have gone the way about it that Joshua Logan did. But by that time, it was too late. The guard was up.
You sort of wonder if that was just Olivier becoming Olivier. That was his domain, wasn't it? So he had to almost put the act on to become Sir Larry.
Yeah.
But I think, as we've just said, to say they had a difficult relationship on this film is understating it slightly. Let's turn that around a bit. Did it get any better as it went on? Because it's a reasonably decent length of shoot, this film, wasn't it?
It was. I mean, they went into rehearsals in July and they finished shooting she went home on the 20th of November and she went home almost immediately. So it was a long shoot. No, it didn't get better. It really didn't. There were times when they worked okay together. There was a time, for instance, when her drama coach went back to America for we don't know exactly how long it was, but it was either from a week to 2 weeks. And all of a sudden, Marilyn perked up and people could speak to her because nobody was really able to get really close to her on set, because as soon as he cried cut, she went off to her drama coach, and the drama coach was always like, you can't speak to people, you need to stay here, this kind of thing. But when she left, Marilyn suddenly became accessible to all these people, so that became it was quite quiet on the set and peaceful, and that was probably their best part of work. However, then Marilyn found out that Paula Strasberg was having trouble getting back into the UK, something to do with a visa or something like that, and she immediately blamed Laurence Olivier and thought that he was keeping her out, and demanded that she come back. And of course she did, probably only for a couple of weeks after that, before they went home. But by that time, the arguments and aloofness came back again. And so I don't think anybody, I think everybody I spoke to, nobody said that it was any fun on the set. There was fun moments, there was like tiny little anecdotes of funny things that happened, but for the most part, everybody was really glad when it was finished. And in fact, one person told me that she used to sit off camera holding her stomach with worry, thinking what is going to happen next. It was very, very tense.
As we've brought her up, we should really explain who she was. Paula Strasberg deserves an episode of her own, I think. But could you give us a sort of the 30-second version of who Paula Strasberg was and really what the method is? Because it's something that we talk about a lot, and it's one of those things that it's in everybody's shorthand. But what was it, and how was Marilyn trying to apply it?
First of all, Paula Strasberg was the wife of Lee Strasberg, and Lee Strasberg was Marilyn's teacher at the Actors Studio, teaching the method. He was like the boss of the place, and Paula she took on charge of Marilyn as her drama coach and going onto the sets with her. She was on the set of Bus Stop and many different films. So she took on that kind of role, that she would sort of be the traveling companion drama coach person. But basically, the method is where they completely immerse themselves in the role, and they have a series of different techniques and training which seems to be very strange to other people. Like, for instance, Paula Strasberg would say to Marilyn, think about Coca-Cola and Frank Sinatra, and Marilyn would go, oh yes, okay. And Laurence Olivier would be like, what is this? He was classically trained, with voice and all that stuff, breathing and all that. And here's somebody saying to Marilyn, you need to think about a tree, or you need to think about this and that. And it just all seemed very odd. But basically, the method, they completely immerse themselves into the role and take it all on and think back to their own childhoods or different things that happen in their lives to sort of bring out these emotions that need to be brought out. It's a very interesting subject, but it didn't go down well in London in 1956.
So very different from don't bump into the furniture, remember your lines and cash the check then.
Exactly. Yes, exactly.
I always think it's one of those things that as soon as you hear it and knowing what you know about Marilyn as a character, when you hear that part of the method that Lee Strasberg recommended for his students was that they undergo psychoanalysis. And knowing
Yes.
background, knowing Marilyn's childhood trauma, you just, every part of you just thinks, oh, please don't mind that. Please don't mind that for money.
Yes, I know, I completely agree. And I think that, you know, once Marilyn started to go down that route, it was constant harping back to her childhood all the time. And I don't think that that's healthy for anybody. You know, go over childhood experiences and get it sorted out and away. But for every person that she had, every doctor that she had, they seemed to go back over that again. And I don't think that that was healthy. And I think some of these psychiatrists kind of developed an unhealthy relationship with Marilyn. I think that they were thrilled that such a famous person was coming to see them, and it just became a bit strange. You know, her last psychiatrist introduced her into the family, for instance, and she came for Christmas dinner and that kind of thing, and so became a friend. But to me, I think, well, you're either a friend or you're a psychiatrist, but I'm not entirely sure how you can be both. He seemed to think that was their technique going forward, but I think it could be quite depressing for her to keep going over things over and over again.
Yeah, I mean, Marilyn's health is, again, a whole other episode we could do.
Yeah.
She was frequently absent from the set and frequently late. And we know from, I mean, I was watching a little interview with Laurence Olivier from, I think from the 60s or the 70s, and he still was annoyed by how long she kept them waiting. We're not talking 10, 15 minutes. We're talking 4 hours, 4 hours late on set. What do we know about her health at this time that would maybe mitigate some of that annoyance that's come down through the ages?
Well, in terms of physical health, she suffered badly from endometriosis. And we know that she had flare-ups of that during the making of this film. There was a doctor who came to Parkside to examine her and to give her treatment. And I looked into who he was, and his specialist subject was that very subject, endometriosis. And her mental health was very fragile, because at that point, about 6 weeks into production, she found a notebook that Arthur Miller had been writing notes about her, and that sort of sent her off into a spiral of depression. So there was the anxiety of having to go on set. There was the anxiety of acting in front of all these, people who seemed to have their in-jokes and were all friends. And then there was the stress of the whole trip in general. And then there was the notebook, and then the health implications of that. So there was a lot going on during that time. And she actually did say at the end of production, she got up and apologized and said, I have actually been really ill during this trip. And she was. But the thing was that back in the 1950s, I don't think that many people really understood stress and anxiety and mental health problems. Many people have a hard time dealing with that now, so heaven knows what it was like for her in 1956. But she was a very anxious person at times when it came to her work. And her makeup artist at the time, Laurence Olivier, asked him, what is Marilyn's problem when she won't come out of the dressing room? And he just said, I don't know. She just stays in there. She just procrastinates. She just sits in there and doesn't want to come out. So yeah, there was a lot of things going on there. And it was very sad, because I think if she'd felt like she'd been warmly welcomed onto the set, and if her entourage had allowed people more access to her, then I think that it would have been a completely different trip. So that's really sad.
Just before we get on to the next point, I think that's a point that we kind of need to mention, is the cast of the Princess Show. This is British royalty, all the way down from Larry Lee. You got Jack Cardiff on the film. Looks incredible because it's Jack Cardiff. The man could not shoot a bad movie. But that whole, Sybil Thorndike, who is the best thing in the movie. I'm sorry. We all love Marilyn, but Sybil steals it. It is a sort of British family, isn't it? These are people that know the shorthand, that could just walk on stage, say the lines, get off, and it would be half decent. So she is really butting up against the Lovies.
Absolutely. And most of these people had worked together before. Some of them had worked on The Sleeping Prince when it was a stage show. And so Marilyn coming in, it's like, I suppose it's like being an outsider walking into the royal family. They've got all their in-jokes and all their traditions and everything that they do, and you're coming in like a complete stranger to all that, thinking, what's going on here? But it's funny you mentioned Dame Sybil, because when I was writing this book, I just fell so in love with Dame Sybil. I've become pretty obsessed with her now. I've started collecting signed letters, signed books, signed photographs, everything. And I kind of feel at this point like I knew her in some way, because I just researched her so much. And I think out of everyone on the set, she was the person that Marilyn looked up to. She could speak to Marilyn. She wasn't scared of Laurence Olivier, and I think that made a big difference. Many people on the production have said to me, it was definitely Larry's show. He was running it. He was the big boss man. And, I've said to people, well, did you speak to him? Like, oh, heavens, no, we didn't speak to Larry. We weren't allowed to speak to him. But Dame Sybil, well, she'd known him since he was young, and she couldn't have cared less. To her, he was always a kid, so she didn't care. And it's funny because she at one point said to him, "Oh, no one's going to be looking at you when Marilyn's on the screen," and I don't think that went down very well. And then she would criticize his own acting technique and say that Marilyn was the only one of them who knew how to act in front of the camera, because everyone else was a theatre actor. So she really had Marilyn's back, and Marilyn appreciated that too. So I think out of everybody, she was the one that came to Marilyn and really respected her. And every time she spoke to her and spoke about her in the years after that, she was always so kind. And I remember seeing one interview, and she said something about, oh, I don't think Marilyn takes direction very well, but then why should she? She was very like, well, she's Marilyn, So I absolutely adore Dame Sybil. I love her.
What a legend. I mean, in terms of coming in as an outsider into a group of lovies, the fact that this had been a play and that a lot of them had played their parts on the stage already, presumably Marilyn comes in and she's instantly kicked somebody out.
Well, that's a whole other story in itself.
You like that?
Because, yeah, I did. I thought that was great. When the play was on the stage, Laurence Olivier, of course, was playing the prince, and Vivien Leigh was playing the part that would have become Elsie Marina. So not only was she coming in as a stranger, but she was coming in as the replacement for Vivien Leigh. And all of these people who had been involved with the play before had known Vivien, or they knew her in their personal life, or they acted with her in different things. I mean, Vivien Leigh was Scarlett O'Hara, she's unbelievable, And I think if I had ever met Vivien Leigh, I would have been terrified. And I spoke to people on the set who said to me Marilyn seemed terrified of her, because Vivien would sometimes come onto the set to visit, to just popping in, that kind of thing, and Marilyn would be completely intimidated by her. And I'm actually not surprised. I would have been too.
Gosh, and that relationship between those two women must have been incredible, because for Vivien, she's essentially been told she's too old, she's not famous enough, she's not pretty enough to play the role that she played opposite her husband. Well, I think that the thing was, this was very interesting to me when I was doing the book, because there's so many layers to the story as a whole, but there's so many layers to that, because not only was she married to Olivier, but they were also going through some really terrible times, and they'd basically just decided that year they'd give their marriage another shot, and she had become pregnant. But then unfortunately she lost the baby. So there was all that sort of thing going on too. And so she was at Notley Abbey recovering from that. And Laurence Olivier was still coming to the set every day, still trying to work, still dealing with
Marilyn and her lateness and, you know, her absences, and then having to go home and deal with, you know, another woman with her problems and everything. And so I think people don't really give Laurence Olivier enough credit for everything that he was going through on that set. And I know he could be snotty and demanding and all of those things, but my goodness, what a time for him as well as a human being, which of course many people forget, that these actors are actually human beings with emotions and problems and arguments and all of those things. And so I think that it was a pretty complicated time for him.
Vivian was terribly ill as well, wasn't she? She was struggling with her own mental health issues, which there's this weird sort of mirror to Marilyn as well, isn't there? That's fascinating. But dear listener, if you want to know more about Vivien Leigh and Laurence Olivier, Charlie and I will be back to discuss that. And Charlie's back soon to discuss that, actually.
Another book that I'm bag seeing off you, that one. Right?
Yes. So there's a little hint. But let's bring in, I know we want to just talk about Marilyn, but let's bring in another gentleman, because this whole story, basically, if it's not star power, you don't really get into it, because Marilyn's on honeymoon for this shoot. She's just married Arthur Miller. They've been together a little bit, but we've already mentioned his diary where he's sort of mining different ideas and things. But what is he getting up to as well? And did he get any work done? Because this is interesting for him, because this is right at the same time HUAC is coming down on him like a ton of bricks as well. So he's got a lot going on. Everything's going on. So what is going on?
Absolutely. I mean, this is a thing that's kind of frustrating to me, that many people just sort of see him as a hanger-on, that he just came over as the husband. But actually, he did work while he was here. He put on a production of A View from the Bridge, and he was working on that. He was working on rehearsals for that quite a lot. And then Marilyn was leaning on him as a support. So he was often at Pinewood Studios trying to work things out there, telling Marilyn that she was good enough and that she was, you know, she could get through this scene and all that kind of thing. Then there was the issues at home, because she was taking pills and sleeping pills and different things like that. And then everything else that was going on, people following them around, people always in their house, always people in the house. There was staff, there was Marilyn's entourage, there was the bodyguard, the policeman, everyone everywhere. So I think he was struggling a little bit too, because this was the first time that he'd ever really seen Marilyn work. He'd been around with Marilyn when she did Bus Stop. He wasn't there, but she used to tell him everything that was going on. She wrote long letters to him and phone calls, and he would write back and everything else about different things that was going on. But this was the first time that he'd witnessed how his wife worked, and it came as quite a shock to him. I spent a lot of time talking about the notebook incident, because for people who don't know, Marilyn, 6 weeks into the trip, came across his notebook, and it said something about her, which we don't know because he never made it public, but we think that it was something to do with how disappointed he was in her and how he was now sympathizing with Olivier. And many people in the Marilyn community will say that's disgusting, he should never have done it, no wonder she had stress problems, all that kind of thing. But you've got to look at the bigger picture. Here's a man who's a writer. He's a very quiet man, very private man. He's all of a sudden in this goldfish bowl of all these people all around him. He can't speak to Marilyn about his feelings because of her own personal issues. So he writes it down. And I can see that from the point of view of a writer, because I write things down too. And most of the time I write it down and then it's just gone. It's gone out of my head, and it's just, I don't even mean half the things that I've said. But he left this notebook out and Marilyn saw it. So that was a complete disaster. But from his point of view, I can completely see why he had to write it down, because many writers do. Many writers keep diaries or notebooks and journals, but it's not generally for the consumption of their other half. And if it was, then it would cause the same kind of problems, I guess.
And we think that perhaps some of Arthur Miller's notebooks at the time inspired a later play that he produced.
Yes, well, he wrote After the Fall, which was inspired by his relationship with Marilyn. And there's a scene in there where she's talking about finding his notebook and what it says. and then and how it affected her and the marriage and everything else. And so that's interesting that he never spoke about it in his autobiography. He never chose to speak about it publicly. I asked him about it. I wrote an email to him and said, please, could you speak to me about it? And he basically just wrote back saying no. And that was it, because he didn't want to speak about it. But the only way I think that he could deal with that whole issue, which caused a tremendous amount of pain, was through fiction. That's the only way that he could do that. And a lot of writers do that, certainly.
I love that. I've actually been reading it, and it's painful to read.
It is
what you know. And there's
yeah.
a bit where it says, an instant's hesitation, and he turns quickly to the listener and cries out, is it that I'm looking for some simple-minded constancy that never is and never was? That dissatisfaction. I can just imagine him writing that about his marriage to Marilyn, and her finding
it's how most writers do things. We see things happen to us, we write it down. Sometimes it comes out. I mean, I write fiction too, and sometimes things that have happened come out in fiction because it's your way. I think he once said in this interview, and I'm just paraphrasing here, but it was something like, you can write fiction because it's a way of saying the unsayable. And I love that, because things that you can't get out to other people, or that you can't compute in your head, you can write it into fiction, and suddenly you can work out what your problems were surrounding that issue and things that happened there. So I completely understand it, but I think unless you're a writer, or unless you open yourself up to the whole story, there's so many people who just say, well, that's it, he was a terrible husband because of that one thing. But I think you've got to see the layers, and you've got to open your mind as to everything that was going on at that point, because it must have been awful. It must have been so painful to be over here on what you think is going to be your working honeymoon, and then all this happens. It must have been the shock of his life, surely.
Please tell me that email response from Arthur Miller is literally just no, best regards, Arthur.
Yeah, basically. I mean, it was it was quite shocking. Like, it really was just like one word and two at the most, but it really was just like da-da, and that was it. And I remember writing back going, oh well, thank you very much anyway, like trying to maybe be really friendly so that he would go, oh okay, I've changed my mind. But no, I never heard from him again. I don't even know how I got his email address. I'm a bit of a stalker when it comes to researching people. I can always find my mum always says to me, if you wanted to, you could find the private number for the Queen, because you can find anything. And so I don't know how I found Arthur Miller's email address, but he wasn't having any of it anyway, so it was a waste of time.
Amazing. Well, look, you brought us very neatly into the next thing we need to talk about. So come on, tell us about when Marilyn met the Queen. This is arguably the two most famous women in the world at that time, if not still now the most recognizable two females on the planet. What happened? Did anyone make a faux pas? Did anyone embarrass themselves? Do we know what they thought of each other? Did they go out drinking? What happened?
That would have been great if they'd gone down the pub together. Well, when Marilyn arrived in England, she said that she wanted to meet the Queen. And so from an early stage on the set, she sort of campaigned to go. She wanted to go to Buckingham Palace and have, I guess, have scones and tea, and a little chat. And so she told one of the publicists on the set that that's what she wanted to do. She used to give him a list of things that she wanted, and that was one of them. And he would take that to Laurence Olivier and be like, oh my goodness, scrub this off, and off he'd go. And it seemed like it was never going to come to anything. But then she received an invitation to the Royal Command performance, and she was told, in fact, everybody was told, it wasn't just Marilyn, but everybody was told, no low cut dresses. Everyone, has to be high neck dress. You must not wear low cut dresses. It was like really like no. And so one of the reporters, I think it was Donald Zeck, he phoned up most of the women and said, what are you wearing? And they were all like, oh, of course it's going to be high neck, blah, blah, blah. And he phoned up Marilyn, and she said, my dress is a matter between me and my dressmaker. And of course It was so low, and it was cut really, really low. And people have said before, when you watch the footage, Marilyn curtsies and the Queen sort of looks up and down. And it's funny because I saw a discussion a couple of weeks ago, people saying, oh, she did that deliberately to disrespect the Queen. I don't think that was it at all. Not at all. I don't think that would have entered her head. She just wanted to wear this gown that she thought was fun, that the dressmaker actually made note of the fact that Marilyn had actually drawn a little sketch herself of the sort of things she wanted to wear. And then, of course, they went into the design stage. But I think she just thought it was a fun thing. She wore platform heels, it was gold. It was just everything that, she wanted it to be. It had a cape. And the thing was that they spoke about being neighbours, because the Queen said to her, oh, I hear we're neighbours. And Marilyn was like, what? I thought you lived in a castle. And she's like, well, I live in Windsor, and Windsor's right next to Englefield Green. So then Marilyn said, well, oh, me and my husband have been cycling in your park, in Windsor Park. So then they talked a little bit about that. And then when the Queen walked on, Princess Margaret came and spoke to Marilyn, and they spoke about Englefield Green and everything. And she walked on to the next person on the list, and she was talking to him about A View from the Bridge, Arthur Miller's play. And Marilyn butted in and said, oh, excuse me, that's my husband's play, you must come and see it. And so Princess Margaret said, well, I might. And I actually wrote to Princess Margaret to see if she ever did go, and I got a lovely reply. And she did actually go and see the play on Marilyn's recommendation. So that was lovely to know. But I think Marilyn was just so full of joy. One of the journalists caught up with her afterwards, and she showed him how she curtsied, and she said she was really bubbly, and she really was talking about everything that they spoke about. She was speaking very fast and just full of joy. And when they left London Airport to go home, Marilyn actually said that the highlight of the trip was meeting the Queen, and that she thought she was a lovely woman. I think it's an amazing story, because Marilyn, for the whole of the trip, she was not obsessed with the Queen, but really, really intrigued by her. And she had an assistant who she would ask, where's the best place to go for gloves like the Queen, or perfume like the Queen, things like that. So it was sort of a general build up towards actually meeting her, and I just think it was lovely that she was able to do it.
Marilyn Monroe and Princess Margaret on a night out, that would have been quite something.
I think that could have been quite wild.
Let's bring this right round. So we've had this rather torturous production, which has thankfully come to an end. So how was The Sleeping Prince, as it was still called until just before release, received? And why let's ask this. Why did they change the name? Because I think that's a fun story.
Yeah, well, Laurence Olivier wanted The Sleeping Prince, and Warner Brothers actually, this happened right at the end of the trip as Marilyn was leaving. Warner Brothers told him that they didn't like the words The Sleeping Prince, basically because it didn't really involve Marilyn's side of the play. It was just about him, really. So they came up with some different alternatives. The Prince and the Showgirl being one. He didn't like it. He thought it sounded like an Edwardian musical or something. Him and Terence Rattigan tried to come up with other ones, and there was all sorts of silly different titles that came up, but eventually Warner Brothers got their way, and it was The Prince and the Showgirl. But when it was released, it was kind of mixed reviews. There was some favorable reviews. A lot of reviews actually say that Dame Sybil stole the whole show. Many different people said that. A lot of the reviewers said that Marilyn was sweet and funny and just wonderful, whereas they sort of said that Laurence Olivier was stiff, and they couldn't really get on board with his character at all. When it comes to the general public, I think that they were a bit, it was hit or miss with them. It was no 7-Year Itch, it was no Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. But I actually, when I was writing this book, I was watching this film almost constantly. Like it was during the pandemic, and my husband was working in the next room, and he would be like, oh my God, this film is on again. I'm like, oh, well, I'm sorry, but this is part of my work. And so I was just watching it constantly. And I have to say, I haven't watched it since I finished writing it. But maybe I should go back and watch it again. I have said to my parents, once they've finished reading the books, they've both got their own copy and they're both reading it at the moment. And I've said, as soon as you've finished, we'll watch The Prince and the Showgirl together, because they've never seen it. And as watching it, knowing what you know about this trip, I think it'll be a whole other experience. So I think that will be quite fun to do. But it's definitely up there with one of my favorites, because of everything that that's involved in terms of me and the research for this book. So I just love it. I think it, it's just a little frothy romp, as Olivier thought that it would be. And I can't take my eyes off Marilyn too. She just looks amazing, just beautiful.
She really is so beautiful in it. And it's I feel bad for it. I feel very badly for The Prince and the Showgirl, because I think that if I'd happened to watch it earlier, before the Compare the Meerkat adverts, I would have enjoyed it a lot more, because Olivier's accent can only be described as Alexander the Meerkat.
Oh my God.
And I'm really sorry if you've not noticed it. And if
no, I hadn't noticed that.
He's comparing the meerkat. I'm really sorry.
No.
I thought
you've completely ruined it for me.
I've now ruined.
Let's be fair. If you ever hear the words Laurence Olivier doing an accent, you know it's going to be terrible, because it was at 49th Parallel. He plays a Quebecois trapper, and you're like, "What are you doing, Larry? Please, just speak English. It's easier."
Give us the Larry accent. That's what we're here for. That's what we're paying for. Couldn't you be an English prince? Come on.
I don't know. Oh dear. Well, that's all I'll think about now. So thank you.
Thank you for ruining the movie, Charlie.
Oh,
yeah,
no,
you've completely ruined my 30-year experience of this movie.
Oh, and I told you were going to have such a nice time on this podcast with us, and I've ruined your film. I'm so sorry.
Well, I'm just going to have to go and watch it now and just see for myself.
Oh, I was watching the trailer earlier, and it did just the irony of it. It says Laurence Olivier was never better. Marilyn Monroe in her happiest role. Oh, honey.
Yeah. I know the trailer is quite sort of over the top, isn't it? It's like, whoa, settle down.
I love 50s trailers. I think they're fantastic.
I know, they're very funny. Oh dear. But yeah, that's the funny thing, I think, as well, about the film, that at the end of the film they've fallen in love, but they've got to say goodbye, and we presume that they never see each other again, and he goes off in one direction, she goes off in the other, and it's like, oh, how sad, they couldn't work it out. Whereas at the end of the actual England trip, she went off in one direction, he went off in the other, and it was like, see ya. Like they couldn't have cared less about each other, and he really didn't want to go to the airport to see her off, but he was told, you have to go, it's going to be good publicity. And so he went, and they were photographed saying goodbye to each other, and he kissed her and she kissed him and she kissed Vivian, and then they all kissed each other, and it was all lovey-dovey. But the truth of it was that the smiles were actually because they were saying goodbye. And they hoped never to see each other again. Although they did see each other one more time, because Olivier went over to New York the year after. And he went over to show Jack Warner The Sleeping Prince, The Prince and the Showgirl. And he was sort of persuaded to do some publicity pictures while he was there. And when they first said to him, he was like, oh, no, I'm not going. But then when he went, Marilyn was completely different, because she wasn't on a film set, she was on a studio set, photographic studio set, which she was very comfortable in, and she was very, very different. But I had a source who was actually there, and one of the publicity men, and he said to me, she stayed for a couple of rolls of film, and she was really, really lovely, and then all of a sudden she was just like, right, that's it, goodbye, and she just left. There was no like hugs or staying around for a cup of tea. It was just like, no, I've done my job, and now I'm off. So that I think that was something that shocked Olivier, that he had no intentions of seeing Marilyn on this trip, and then all of a sudden here she is. But luckily for him, they actually did get on during that time.
Well, he said he thought the reason for that was that she was a model.
Exactly. Yes,
She wasn't an
he
actress.
did say that. He did. He said that a few times over the course of his life in books and on screen, that he had come to the decision that she was a model rather than an actress. And I think that's very insulting to her, because quite clearly she was a magnificent actress. I mean, she acted him off the screen, whether he liked it or not. That was the case. And if you see her in The Misfits, I mean, this woman was a genius in front of a camera. She really could act. I'll never understand when people say she couldn't act, because it's just not true. It's just ridiculous. So for him to just sort of say, oh, well, she was a model, not an actress, is insulting. And it's just him sort of dismissing everything that happened between them. It's very conveniently, but it wasn't true, in my opinion.
It's the value or the lack of value that's attached to comedic acting.
Exactly.
Because her timing was, and the looks that she could give. Some Like It Hot is the greatest film ever made. Let's be honest.
I love it.
She was phenomenal, and to feel like she wasn't good enough or wasn't a proper actress because she wasn't crying and winning Oscars.
Yeah.
It's just a shame that that's the value judgment that was made of her. It's still made today of performances.
It is. And it is a shame, because her timing was unbelievable. And actually, on Christmas Day, I was at my mum and dad's house, and Gentlemen Prefer Blondes came on. And I was like, oh my God, you have to watch it. And like, my mum and dad, even though they lived with me for many years when I became a Marilyn fan when I was 15 onwards, they'd never seen Gentlemen Prefer Blondes. And I was like, no, please, you have got to watch it. So they sat and watched it, and my dad was like, actually, that film was really funny. And when she was coming out of the porthole and all that sort of stuff, they were laughing. And then a couple of months ago, I was like, right, this is it now. You've watched Gentlemen Prefer Blondes, now it's time for the 7-Year Itch. And they both absolutely loved that. And I loved watching their reactions of seeing Marilyn on the screen. And like, there's one bit where she's running across the floor and she kind of skids a little bit, and my mum's like, oh my goodness, did you see her skid? And oh, she's sweet. And and oh, look at her face there. And it was just lovely seeing them, because it was as if they were seeing her for the first time, because they've read all of my books and they've heard me harp on about her for nearly 40 years, but to actually watch her on the screen and to see what I see, that was a different experience, and they really loved it. I really liked that.
I'd say to anyone, go back and watch All About Eve, and the scene that she's in. The camera just can't not look at her, but she's learning. She's watching Bette Davis. She's watching George Sanders. You can see she's like, I have this opportunity. I'm taking it. And she's translucent in that, which is kind of her role. She's supposed to be the disposable blonde, but you can see her in it. She's just soaking all of that in and then projecting it back out, because it takes a little bit of time to get over her after, because she's not coming back, and you're sort of like, okay, so back to Anne and Bet. But
I agree. I love that film. I love it for many reasons. One, because I was born on Bette Davis's birthday, so she's my birthday buddy, and I've loved her since I was a teenager. Since I found that out when I was about, I don't know, 15 or 16, I've loved her ever since then. So when I first watched All About Eve, to see Bette Davis on the screen and then have Marilyn come in, it's like, whoa, this is too much. But she's amazing in it. I love that. The scene where they're on the stairs and she wants a drink and all that kind of thing. I love that film, and I haven't seen it for a long time, but I must actually watch that again. It's a magnificent film.
We're giving people loads of things to go away and watch now, so maybe
we are.
I'm just going to throw in Google Dawn with Sybil Thorndike in it, where she's playing Edith Cavell. It's a silent film, and it is just incredible. Everybody should see it. It's amazing. But I think we need to start wrapping this up. Otherwise, we're going to start talking about everything else.
We would. I told you, Michelle and I are going to talk about Marilyn all night.
I want to talk about Thelma Todd, but we're going to have to do that in another episode.
I'll gladly come back. That would be great.
Oh, please do.
We're booking you in. Charlie will send you a list.
Oh, good.
But Michelle, thank you so much. This has been fantastic. I need to go fight Charlie for your book now. And yeah, I've ordered the girl as we've been sitting here.
Yay! Well, that's good.
Seriously, this has been wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome. Thanks so much for having me on. It's been really lovely.
Oh, and we will say, just before we go, the book is available on our very own bookshop. So check out the description and you can get it straight through us. And everybody's happy and Jeff Bezos doesn't get a penny.